You arrive at the edge of the Nile, just as the first light of dawn spreads across the water. In the distance, beyond gardens of palms and stone walls painted with bright colors, rises a palace, unlike anything most people in the ancient world would ever see. This is not simply a residence. It is the living heart of power in ancient Egypt, the court of the pharaoh. As you pass through the massive entrance gates, guarded by soldiers holding bronze-tipped spears, the atmosphere changes immediately. The noise of the outside world fades behind thick mud brick walls and polished stone corridors. Inside, everything feels deliberate, ordered, almost theatrical. Servants move silently between rooms. Scribes carry scrolls of papyrus documenting every decision, every tribute, every shipment arriving from distant lands. The palace is a machine of authority, and at its center stands the most powerful figure in the kingdom. The pharaoh is not merely a king. In the minds of the people, he is the living link between the human world and the divine order of the gods. His presence represents stability, prosperity, and cosmic balance. When he appears before the court, every movement is observed carefully, every gesture interpreted as a reflection of divine will. Maintaining that image requires more than military strength or political control. It requires spectacle. This is where the hidden world of the court begins to reveal itself. Within these palace walls live individuals whose purpose is not governance, but performance. Musicians, dancers, storytellers, and acrobats form a carefully organized community devoted to shaping the emotional atmosphere of the royal court. Their work may appear like entertainment, but here it serves a deeper role, reinforcing the power and divine authority of the pharaoh. Imagine entering the Great Hall during a royal banquet. The room is illuminated by oil, lamps, and open windows that allow the warm Egyptian light to filter across painted columns. Noble families sit upon low cushions while servants bring trays filled with bread, roasted meats, figs, dates, and wine. And then, as the gathering settles into quiet anticipation, the music begins. Harpists pluck delicate strings, creating slow rhythmic melodies that fill the hall with a sense of calm and grandeur. Nearby, dancers step forward in carefully rehearsed patterns, their movements flowing with grace and precision. Their bodies move like living hieroglyphs, telling stories through motion. Between performances, storytellers recite heroic tales of gods and kings, reminding every listener that the ruler seated before them stands within a sacred tradition stretching back through generations. Even acrobats sometimes appear, bending their bodies into astonishing shapes that draw laughter and amazement from the audience. Yet every performance is carefully controlled. Nothing here is random. Each sound, each movement, each gesture contributes to the atmosphere of harmony and power surrounding the throne. Through music and spectacle, the court communicates a message without words. Egypt is prosperous, stable, and blessed by the gods because the pharaoh rules. But as you watch these performers moving through the palace halls, another truth slowly becomes visible. These entertainers live closer to power than almost anyone in the kingdom, yet they remain bound to it. Their talents grant them access to royal spaces that ordinary citizens will never see, but their lives depend entirely on the favor of the court. A musician who pleases the pharaoh may receive jewelry, clothing, or a place of honor during ceremonies. A dancer whose performance fails to impress might disappear quietly from the palace roster. Behind the elegance of their art lies a delicate balance of privilege, and vulnerability. Many of these performers have trained since childhood, selected for their skill, beauty, or family tradition in music and dance. Their days are shaped by rehearsals, ceremonies, and the constant expectation of perfection. In a place where every detail contributes to the image of divine authority, there is little room for mistakes. Yet, within this system, entertainers also become witnesses to the hidden rhythms of power. They see the tensions between officials, the arrival of foreign diplomats, the celebrations of victory, and the quiet anxieties of leadership. There, music fills the spaces between political decisions, religious rituals, and royal announcements. In many ways, they are both participants and observers in the theater of empire. As the evening in the palace hall continues, the music grows louder, and the dancers spin beneath painted ceilings that depict the stars of the Egyptian sky. The pharaoh watches from his throne, surrounded by nobles and advisors, while the performances unfold before him like living symbols of prosperity and control. But what appears to be simple entertainment is something far more complex. Inside the courts of the pharaohs, performance is power, art is politics, and every note played on a harp helps sustain the illusion of a kingdom guided by divine order. And as you stand within this magnificent palace, watching the performers move through light and shadow, one question begins to emerge. What was it truly like to live among power in a world where even music served the throne? Now, imagine stepping away from the dazzling halls of the royal palace and traveling back several years earlier to the places where the performers of the Pharaoh's court first begin their journey. Long before music fills the palace chambers or dancers move before noble guests. The path toward becoming a royal entertainer often begins in childhood. You walk through the courtyard of a temple complex where the morning sun reflects softly against limestone walls. Here, far from the noise of the markets and fields, young apprentices gather under the watchful eyes of experienced instructors. These are not ordinary schools. In ancient Egypt, music, dance, and performance are deeply connected to religion, ceremony, and the balance between the human world and the divine. Many children who train here come from families already linked to temple service or artistic traditions. A daughter of a musician, a child from a family of singers, or a young performer noticed during local festivals might be invited to study under temple guidance. Selection is rarely random. Talent, discipline, and sometimes physical appearance all play a role in determining who might one day perform within the court of a pharaoh. Inside shaded rooms, the sounds of instruments echo softly as lessons begin. Young musicians learn to pluck the strings of Egyptian harps, long wooden instruments whose curved shapes resemble the wings of birds. Others practice the lute or the lyre, repeating melodic patterns that must be memorized with precision. Nearby, instructors demonstrate the use of percussion instruments and the distinctive sistrum, a sacred rattle made of metal rods and discs that produces a shimmering sound when shaken. The sistrum is not merely an instrument of entertainment. Its sound is believed to calm divine forces and bring joy to the gods, especially to Hathor, the goddess of music. Dance, beauty, and celebration. In temple rituals dedicated to Hathor, the sistrum becomes a sacred object capable of connecting the performer to divine presence. Because of this belief, musicians who master it carry a responsibility that reaches far beyond performance. You continue walking through the temple complex and notice another group of apprentices training in movement. Young dancers repeat sequences of gestures again and again under the direction of experienced performers. Their movements are precise and controlled. Hands extend outward, feet glide along the floor, and bodies bend into elegant curves. What appears graceful and effortless during a palace banquet is the result of countless hours of disciplined repetition. Training does not focus only on technique. Performers are also taught posture, balance, and symbolic movement. In Egyptian culture, many gestures carry meaning. A turn of the wrist or the angle of a step may represent divine harmony, celebration, or the victory of order over chaos. When dancers perform inside the royal court, their bodies communicate ideas that reinforce the sacred authority of the pharaoh. Acrobats train nearby in open courtyards where the ground is softened with woven mats. Their exercises develop flexibility, strength, and extraordinary balance. They learn to bend backward, lift themselves into handstands, and coordinate complex movements with other performers. These displays of physical skill often amaze palace audiences. But, like the musicians and dancers, the acrobats are expected to practice tirelessly before ever appearing in a royal ceremony. As the apprentices grow older and their skills improve, attention also turns toward appearance and presentation. In the world of the royal court, visual elegance is essential. Performers learn how to wear finely woven linen garments that allow freedom of movement while reflecting Egyptian standards of beauty. Wigs made from human hair or plant fibers are carefully styled, and scented oils are applied to skin and hair to create an atmosphere of refinement. Cosmetics also play a role. Dark kohl eyeliner is applied around the eyes, not only for beauty, but also for protection against the sun and dust. When performers stand before an audience in the palace halls, their appearance must reflect grace, harmony, and perfection, but behind the elegance lies strict discipline. Instructors expect absolute focus during training. Mistakes are corrected immediately. Performers must memorize complex sequences of music, dance, and ritual gestures that will later be performed before nobles, priests, and sometimes the pharaoh himself. The palace does not accept performers who are merely talented. It requires individuals capable of representing the cultural and spiritual identity of Egypt. Those who succeed in this training may eventually be selected to enter the royal court. It is an honor that brings access to a world few people will ever see. Yet it also means entering an environment where expectations are constant and where every performance contributes to the image of divine power surrounding the throne. As you watch these apprentices practicing beneath the Egyptian sun, repeating movements and melodies with tireless determination, one realization becomes clear. The entertainers who appear so effortlessly graceful in the palace halls are not casual performers. They are the result of years of discipline, sacred tradition, and artistic mastery. And their training reveals that in ancient Egypt, music and performance were never simply entertainment. They were part of a cultural system designed to celebrate the gods and strengthen the authority of the pharaoh. As the sun rises over the palace gardens, the world inside the royal residence begins to stir long before the pharaoh himself appears. You walk through the quiet corridors of the palace complex, where the scent of incense lingers in the air, and servants move quickly to prepare the spaces that will soon be filled with nobles, officials, and guests. For the entertainers who live within these walls, the day begins early, shaped by a routine that blends artistic preparation with the strict discipline of court life. In a shaded courtyard, not far from the great audience hall, musicians gather with their instruments as the morning light spills across polished stone floors. Harp strings are tightened carefully. Lutes are tuned by experienced hands. Soft melodies echo between the columns as performers rehearse the musical pieces they may be called to play later in the day. Nothing here is improvised. Every sound must be precise, familiar, and worthy of the royal court. Nearby, dancers prepare for their own rehearsals. You see them practicing the fluid movements that will later appear effortless before an audience. Arms extend slowly, feet glide across the ground, and bodies turn with controlled grace. What may look like simple elegance during a banquet is the result of constant repetition. Even small gestures are corrected by instructors who watch closely, ensuring that every motion reflects harmony and balance. The palace itself is a place of constant activity. Servants deliver food and supplies from storerooms. Scribes carry papyrus documents between officials. And priests prepare the daily rituals that honor the gods. In the midst of this carefully organized world, entertainers move between practice rooms and performance halls, always ready to respond when the court calls for spectacle. As afternoon approaches, preparations begin for the events that define palace life. Royal banquets are among the most elaborate gatherings in ancient Egypt, combining food, music, and ceremony into displays of wealth and power. The great halls are decorated with flowers, linen fabrics, and polished bronze lamps. Cushions are arranged for noble guests, while servants prepare trays of bread, fruit, roasted meats, and wine. When the guests arrive, the atmosphere transforms. Conversation fills the room, and the scent of perfumes drifts through the air. Then, at a quiet signal from palace officials, the entertainers begin their work. You hear the first notes of a harp resonate across the hall. Musicians seated near the walls create gentle melodies that accompany the evening. Dancers step forward into the open space between the guests, their movements flowing in rhythm with the music. Their performances are not only meant to entertain, but to create an atmosphere of elegance and harmony that reflects the prosperity of the kingdom. Sometimes the pharaoh himself is present, seated on an elevated throne surrounded by advisors and royal family members. In those moments, every performer understands the importance of the scene unfolding before them. Their music and movement become part of a living display of royal authority. At other times, the audience may include high-ranking nobles or foreign visitors who have traveled great distances to witness the power of Egypt. For these guests, the performances offer more than amusement. They reveal a kingdom that appears organized, wealthy, and blessed by divine favor. Yet, behind the beauty of these performances lies more complicated reality. Life among the entertainers of the court is not always harmonious. Rivalries often emerge between performers competing for attention and recognition. A musician who impresses the royal household may receive gifts of jewelry or fine clothing, while another performer might wait months for the opportunity to perform again. Favor from the elite can change a performer's life overnight. Some entertainers become trusted members of the royal household, invited to participate in important ceremonies or private celebrations. These individuals gain access to spaces and conversations that few others ever experience. But the same proximity to power also brings risk. In a palace, where every action is observed and remembered, a failed performance or a moment of disrespect can carry serious consequences. Entertainers must remain constantly aware of their place within the hierarchy of the court. Still, for many performers, the rewards of palace life are extraordinary. They live in an environment filled with beauty, music, and cultural prestige. They wear finely crafted garments and jewelry that ordinary citizens rarely see. Most importantly, they perform before the most powerful individuals in the kingdom, becoming part of ceremonies that shape the public image of Egypt itself. As the evening banquet reaches its peak, dancers spin beneath painted ceilings while musicians maintain the rhythm that fills the hall. Guests laugh, servants move between tables, and the palace glows with light and celebration. For a moment, it seems like a perfect world of luxury and harmony. But as you watch the performers carefully, maintaining their grace under the eyes of nobles and officials, you begin to understand the delicate balance of their lives. They exist at the edge of power, admired for their talent, yet always aware of the expectations placed upon them. Within the palace of the pharaoh, entertainment is both privilege and pressure. A life shaped by opportunity, but shadowed by constant scrutiny. And as the music fades and the hall slowly empties, one question remains lingering in the air. What happens to these performers when their fame fades or when the favor of the court shifts? As the years pass, within the palace walls, some entertainers begin to rise above the countless others who perform in the royal court. You start to notice that not every musician, dancer, or singer remains anonymous. In rare cases, talent combined with loyalty earns a performer something extraordinary in the world of ancient Egypt: recognition. Within the carefully structured hierarchy of the palace, a gifted entertainer might gain the trust of royal officials or even the attention of the pharaoh himself. A harpist whose melodies accompany important ceremonies. A dancer whose movements captivate the court during major festivals. Or a singer whose voice fills temple rituals with emotional power may slowly become known beyond the performance halls. Their presence becomes familiar in royal gatherings, and their role begins to extend beyond simple entertainment. Some of these performers serve not just one ruler, but several. As dynasties continue and pharaohs succeed one another, certain musicians and singers remain within the palace for decades. Their experience allows them to adapt to new courts while preserving the traditions of earlier reigns. In this way, entertainers quietly become guardians of cultural continuity, carrying melodies, dances, and ritual practices across generations of rulers. You might also encounter women known as chantresses within temple institutions connected to the royal court. These women are more than performers. Their singing accompanies sacred ceremonies dedicated to powerful deities such as Amun, Isis, and especially Hathor, the goddess of music and joy. When they sing during rituals, their voices are believed to honor the gods and maintain harmony between the divine and human worlds. Through these performances, music becomes a spiritual bridge that reinforces the sacred authority of the pharaoh. As you move deeper into the palace environment, another reality becomes visible. Some entertainers develop personal relationships with members of the royal household. A musician who performs regularly for the queen may gain her favor and protection. A singer who entertains royal children might become a familiar presence within the private chambers of the palace. These connections can bring stability, gifts, and long careers in a world where most performers remain replaceable. But despite these rare opportunities, the majority of entertainers leave few traces behind. When you examine the archaeological remains of ancient Egypt today, you often encounter their presence only through images painted on tomb walls or carved into temple reliefs. Scenes of banquets show musicians seated beside noble guests. Dancers appear frozen in elegant poses beneath painted ceilings. Acrobats bend into impossible shapes, while spectators watch in admiration. These images prove that entertainers were valued parts of court life. Yet they rarely include detailed names or personal histories. The pharaohs, generals, and priests dominate written records, while the performers who helped shape the emotional world of the palace remain mostly silent within the historical archive. You begin to realize that this silence does not mean their role was insignificant. On the contrary, their influence helped construct the very image of royal power that still fascinates the modern world. Every ceremony inside the palace depended on atmosphere. Music guided the rhythm of rituals. Dance transformed celebrations into spectacles of harmony and prosperity. Storytellers preserved myths that connected each ruler to the divine origins of Egypt. Through performance, the court projected an image of order, beauty, and divine favor that reinforced the legitimacy of the pharaoh's rule. Without these artists, the throne would still possess authority, but it would lack the emotional power that made royal ceremonies unforgettable. In many ways, the entertainers of ancient Egypt were architects of cultural memory. Their performances helped define how people experienced royal celebrations, religious festivals, and diplomatic gatherings. Even though their individual names often disappeared with time, their artistic traditions survived in the imagery and symbols that continue to represent Egyptian civilization today. As the centuries passed and the great palaces slowly faded into ruins beneath the desert sands, the voices of these performers fell silent. Yet their legacy remained embedded in paintings, instruments, and the stories preserved in temples and tombs along the Nile, standing now in the shadow of those ancient monuments. You begin to understand that the history of Egypt was never shaped by rulers alone. Behind every throne stood musicians who filled the halls with sound, dancers who transformed ceremonies into living art, and storytellers who carried the myths of gods and kings across generations. They lived close to power, helped shape the image of divine authority, and then quietly disappeared into history. Yet, without them, the courts of the pharaohs would never have felt as magnificent as they did.